Long before any written word or painted cave, there existed a language older than speech itself, the language of rhythm, of movement, of sound carried on the wind through forests that have long since turned to coal. Not just communication, but something deeper, something that connected our ancestors to the earth beneath their feet and the stars above. What if the first music was not a song at all, but the beating of a heart against the silence of an ancient world? This is the story of humanity's first rhythms, born in firelight and shadow 50,000 years ago. How did sound become meaning and movement become memory in a time before history had begun to remember itself? The Paleolithic world stretched vast and cold beneath skies untouched by the glow of cities or the hum of machines. Our ancestors moved through landscapes of ice and stone, their survival dependent on reading the subtle languages of nature around them. Every crack of a branch, every bird call, every distant thunder held information that could mean life or death in the frozen wilderness. The human ear was learning to listen, not just to hear, but to understand the patterns hidden within sound itself. And somewhere in that listening, something remarkable was beginning to stir in the human mind and heart. A child strikes two stones together by the fire, and the sharp crack echoes off the cave walls in rhythmic succession. The sound is not random, but deliberate, a pattern emerging from chaos like the first stars appearing in the evening sky. The adults pause in their work, their attention drawn to this simple repetition that somehow feels significant and strangely powerful. This is not the first time stones have been struck together, but perhaps it is the first time anyone truly listened. Rhythm was always there in the world, waiting to be discovered in the pulse of blood and the cycle of seasons. The heartbeat was humanity's first metronome, a steady drum that accompanied every moment from birth until the final silence came. Footsteps on hard earth created their own percussion, a sound our ancestors heard thousands of times each day without conscious thought. But now, in this moment by the fire, someone is choosing to create rhythm deliberately, to make pattern from possibility and intention. The stones click together in time with the heartbeat, and something ancient awakens in the listeners gathered around the flames. Can you imagine the moment when sound first became more than just noise, when it transformed into something meaningful and shared? The fire crackles and pops, its own chaotic music providing a backdrop for this new human creation taking shape in the darkness. One person begins to clap in time with the stones, then another, and suddenly the cave is alive with coordinated sound. This is not just noise anymore, but communication, expression, a way of being together that transcends the limitations of spoken language. The rhythm grows faster, more complex, as hands find new surfaces to strike and feet begin to move in patterns on the earthen floor. A woman rises and begins to sway, her body responding to the beat as if it had always known this dance was waiting inside her. Her movements are not random, but deliberate, telling a story with her hands and feet that everyone watching can somehow understand without words. She becomes the hunt, her crouched posture and careful steps mimicking the stalking of prey through tall grass under moonlight. The rhythm quickens as she springs forward, and the watchers gasp as if they can see the invisible animal fleeing before her. Then she becomes the hunted, her eyes wide with fear, her movements frantic as she darts and dodges imaginary predators in the shadows. Dance was humanity's first theater, a way to rehearse survival, to share knowledge, to transform experience into something that could be remembered. The stories that could not yet be written were being written in the air, traced by moving bodies and preserved in collective memory. Every successful hunt could be celebrated and taught through movement, every danger communicated through gesture and dramatic expression. The children watching would learn not just from words, but from seeing, from feeling the rhythm enter their own bodies and minds. What we call art today began as something far more essential, a technology for survival disguised as celebration and expression. The bones of birds became the first flutes, their hollow chambers transformed into vessels for breath and sound and human intention. Archaeologists have found these ancient instruments buried in caves, their finger holes still visible after 40,000 years of silence. Someone discovered that air passing through bone could create tones that rose and fell like the wind through canyon walls. The first melodies were simple, perhaps just 2 or 3 notes repeated in patterns that pleased the ear and stirred the soul. But in that simplicity lay the seed of every symphony, every song that would ever move a human heart to tears or joy. Music was becoming something more than rhythm now. It was becoming a language of emotion that could express what words never could. A mother hums to her infant, a sound that predates language itself, older than any word we could name or define with precision. That humming carries love and safety, a promise that the child is not alone in the vast and often terrifying darkness of night. The infant's crying stops, soothed by vibrations that resonate not just in the ear, but in the very bones and nervous system. This is music as medicine, as comfort, as the first lullaby sung under stars that have watched over countless generations of humanity. Around the fire, the tribe gathers as night deepens and the sounds of the wilderness grow louder beyond the circle of light. The rhythm returns, slower now, more deliberate, as drums made from stretched animal hide begin their deep and resonant conversation. Each beat travels through the ground and into the bodies of those sitting cross-legged on the earth, creating a physical connection to sound. An elder begins to chant, his voice rising and falling in patterns that seem to come from somewhere deep within the earth itself. The words, if they are words at all, are less important than the tone, the cadence, the way sound can fill space and bind people together. This is the birth of ceremony, of ritual, of the sacred moments when a community becomes more than just individuals struggling to survive. The dance begins again, but now it is different, more formal, more intentional, as bodies move in unison around the fire's edge. They are dancing the story of their people, the journey from distant lands, the battles won and lost, the ancestors who walked before them. Each movement has been passed down through generations, refined and remembered, a living library written in muscle memory and collective tradition. What if every dance was a form of prayer, a way of speaking to forces larger than themselves that governed seasons and weather? The dancers spin and leap, their shadows enormous on the cave walls, creating images that seem almost alive in the flickering firelight. For a moment, past and present merge, and the spirits of ancestors seem to dance alongside the living in this timeless ritual. Music and dance were becoming the glue that held communities together across vast distances and the long winters of the Ice Age. When two tribes met, they would share their rhythms and movements, creating bonds stronger than any spoken treaty or agreement could forge. A young man from one group learns the dance of another, and in that learning, barriers of suspicion and fear begin to dissolve slowly. The universal language of rhythm transcends the differences of dialect and custom, speaking directly to something fundamental in human nature. Anthropologists believe that music and dance may have been essential to human survival, not luxury but necessity in the struggle to thrive. Groups that could coordinate through rhythm, that could share knowledge through dance, had advantages that went far beyond simple communication alone. They could hunt more effectively when their movements were synchronized, could defend their territory with coordinated precision and unified purpose. But more than that, they could maintain social bonds during the long, dark months when survival depended on cooperation and shared resources. The music kept them human when the cold and hunger might have reduced them to something more desperate and isolated and alone. In the depths of caves, far from firelight, our ancestors painted their visions on walls that would endure for tens of thousands of years. Among the images of bison and horses and human hands, there are figures that seem to be dancing, their limbs positioned in impossible motion. Some archaeologists believe these caves were acoustic chambers, chosen specifically for the way sound would resonate and amplify within their depths. Imagine the ceremonies held in these underground cathedrals, where music and art combined to create experiences of overwhelming power and transcendence. The drumbeat would echo off stone walls, multiplying and merging until the entire cave seemed to pulse with a living heartbeat. Dancers would move in the darkness, illuminated only by torches, their shadows becoming part of the painted animals surrounding them on every side. In these moments, the boundary between the human world and the spirit world seemed to dissolve completely into something beyond ordinary experience. This was not entertainment, but transformation, a technology for altering consciousness that we are only beginning to understand, even today. Not just a different way of experiencing the world, but perhaps the very foundation of what we now call religious experience and spiritual awareness. The Ice Age ended, and the world transformed, but the rhythms our ancestors created continued to echo through every generation that followed. Every culture on Earth has music and dance, no exceptions, suggesting that these practices are as fundamental to humanity as language itself. The specific forms changed, evolved, adapted to new environments and new challenges. But the core impulse remained constant and unchanging across millennia. From the drumbeats of Africa to the throat singing of the Arctic, from the gamelan orchestras of Asia to the symphonies of Europe, all share a common ancestor. That ancestor is the unknown person who first recognized that rhythm could be created, that sound could be shaped, that movement could carry meaning. We will never know their name or see their face, but their legacy lives in every song that has ever been sung since that ancient dawn. The oldest musical instrument ever found is a flute, carved from a vulture's wing bone over 40,000 years ago in what is now Germany. Someone held that bone to their lips and breathed life into it, creating tones that traveled through the Paleolithic darkness like birds taking flight. That breath, that sound, that moment of creation connects us across an impossible gulf of time to the very beginning of human artistic expression. When we make music today, we are participating in a tradition older than agriculture, older than cities, older than written history itself. Every time a child claps their hands in rhythm, or spins in circles until dizzy with joy, they are echoing something ancient and essential. The capacity for music and dance is wired into our brains, a gift from ancestors who discovered that rhythm could bind communities together. Modern neuroscience shows that music activates nearly every region of the brain simultaneously, creating connections that enhance memory and emotional processing. Perhaps this is why music feels so powerful, because it speaks to parts of us that existed long before we could speak at all. The first rhythms of humanity were not just entertainment or art. They were survival strategies that became celebration and eventually transcendence. They were the threads that wove isolated individuals into communities, communities into cultures, cultures into the vast tapestry of human civilization. And in every beat, every note, every step of every dance, we carry forward the legacy of those first musicians and dancers by firelight. Do you hear it now? That ancient pulse beneath the surface of every song you've ever loved, or movement that's ever made you feel alive? That is the heartbeat of humanity itself, unchanged across 50,000 years, still calling us to gather and create and move together. The fire has long since turned to ash. The dancers have become dust. But the rhythm continues in every human heart that beats today. Stone has preserved their bones, but music and dance have preserved something far more precious: the living spirit of our shared humanity. In the end, the first rhythms were not just about survival or communication. They were about joy, about being alive in a world of wonder. They were about finding beauty in a harsh world, creating meaning in the face of mortality, and connecting to something larger than individual existence. The Paleolithic musicians and dancers are gone, but their gift remains, passed down through countless generations in an unbroken chain of sound and movement. And so the ancient rhythms continue, echoing through time, reminding us that we are all part of a story that began in firelight and will continue long after we are gone.